Sons of Hercules, thank you guys. All right, let's get into this. We've got a little something on the chalkboard for you, and it is, of course, all about Donald Trump and his claims. So many ways to lock you down, like tariffs. So, if you didn't get to see this, over at the news notes, you will see this. Economy, yeah. Trump, terrorism, and a few other things. So, we got this. First, I want to give you this from Stephen Moore. Stephen Moore, and I've met Stephen, he's a nice guy, even though he worked for Trump in the last administration. Americans now pay more in taxes than they spend on food, clothing, and shelter combined. And I noted, if that chart doesn't include the tariff taxes, then the tax ratio is even higher. Okay. That's our preface to this wonderful horror book. Here's Trump terrorism, tariff style. Trump claims that tariffs made us rich. So let's check it out. Here he is.
Things we put it together between the tariffs that have been, the tariffs have made us rich. Remember, I used to say that tariffs are my favorite word. I love tariffs. They're my favorite word in the dictionary. Tariff. I love tariffs, right? Because we've been screwed by tariffs used against us for years. Things we put it.
Okay. So you might notice the background on that sucker. And I noted that in the news notes. I said, this coming from the man who, while standing in front of a wall with an anti-tax on tips message on it, already hit Americans with the largest tax increases in 70 years. Does that strike anybody as being perhaps mildly hypocritical? That would be his tariffs. The first Trump administration imposed new tariffs on roughly $380 billion worth of U.S. imports, primarily 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum under Section 232, and successive Section 301 duties on Chinese goods, covering over, $300 billion in trade. You often don't hear about that. The steel tariffs harmed some U.S. steelmakers. Firms such as Allegheny Technologies and NLMK USA, which depended on imported semi-finished slabs for rolling, faced prohibitive costs, paid tens of millions in duties, and idled operations after exclusion requests were denied. Even integrated producers like U.S. Steel saw market value losses exceeding $5 billion and furnace idlings amid overcapacity and weaker demand. Now, why would demand be weaker? Oh, that's right, because of the lockdowns. In his second term, beginning January 2025, President Trump's tariffs extracted substantial sums from importers before any IEEPA-related refunds. By late 2025, new duties exceeded $200 billion, with total customs collections reaching $264 billion that year. That's more than the GDP of many countries. Approximately $166 billion came from IEEPA-based reciprocal and other measures later ruled unlawful, as you know, by the Supreme Court in February. And there's NewsGuard. Look, there's that rare thing called a link. Lancelot link. Numerous states are suing Trump over his new attempt now to slam U.S. consumers. Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, ridiculously and stupidly unconstitutional. This is, of course, the fake so-called authority the Trump administration is relying on for the latest round of tariffs. 10% or 12.5% on imports from roughly 59 to 60 countries, plus the European Union, covering the vast majority of U.S. imports. Is that something you want to afford this year? Another 12.5%? Another 11.75%? These took effect around July 24th after temporary tariffs expired, and the administration has framed them as responses to investigations by the U.S. Trade Representative into multiple countries' alleged failures to adequately address goods produced with forced labor in global supply chains. We talked about that last week. That doesn't matter. So again, it's either caveat emptor and you're free, or you're not free. And it's up to you to decide. Do I want to buy something from something that I think comes from forced labor? Now, within a political sphere, people can say, well, shouldn't there be a statute somehow that, punishes people for buying something that's derived from forced labor? All right, well, we can think that through then. How are you going to police that? Well, we're going to take the earnings from a taxpayer. So in other words, you're going to do it through forced labor? Yeah, that's right, we are. So you're going to police people buying stuff that could be made from forced labor by forcing people to give up what they've earned from their labor. Yeah, I think that's fair. No, it's not. It's pretty super lame. Again, there's no argument for the state. There just isn't. Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 authorizes the USTR and ultimately the Presidente to investigate foreign acts, policies, or practices that are unjustifiable, according to them, unreasonable, according to them, and discriminatory, according to them. So in other words, anything he wants if he wants to get some money. So again, how is it that Congress, which is the only entity in their lovely little rule book to impose tariffs, can hand off the power to impose tariffs when they're expressly prohibited from handing off any enumerated power? And I remember hearing somebody on television say, well, they can shift powers to the executive branch. No, they're expressly said you're not supposed to. The founders said, otherwise, why have separation of powers in the first place? Why not make it all one branch? That's just dumb. Who could argue that? Well, yeah, they made these separate branches, but, one branch can do what the other branch does. Well, then why did they make separate branches? You answer your own question. It's just so, wow, man. Maybe you've run into people like that. You just sit there like, did you wake up today or are you still sleeping? I don't know. I just can't figure this out. I mean, it doesn't take much. Like, what is the deal? This is like chewing gum and walking. Please. The 25-state lawsuit, this new lawsuit led by attorneys general from California, Arizona, Oregon, and others, filed in the U.S. Court of International Trade, challenges these measures. So this is the big news on that today. There's a big news, Brzezinski, as exceeding that authority as arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act. Yeah, and as a pretext to recreate broad tariffs previously struck down by the SCOTUS. So there's the link for this, and here we go. So there you are. 25 states sued the Trump administration. That came out on August 3rd, but I didn't get to it sufficiently, so I wanted to give you a little more. So there you go. Yeah, that's the Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. I'm trying to think of some good things that were happening in 1974. I think Battle for the Planet of the Apes came out in 1974. I think that's what it was.